Porcelain. As a child, I always loved dolls. I'd spend hours dressing them up, brushing their hair and talking to them as if they were my friends. My parents would often bring me new dolls to add to my collection, and I cherished each and every one of them. But there was this one doll that stood out from the others. It was an old porcelain doll with big blue eyes and a permanent smile on its face. My parents pointed it out to me while we were browsing at an old antique shop, and they thought it would make a great addition to my collection. I was hesitant at first because I never really had a doll like this one before, but as soon as I really looked at its beautiful dress and delicate features, I knew I had to have it. From the moment I brought the doll home though, strange things started happening. At first, it was just little things like the doll moving from one place to another, even though I had not touched it. Then, I started hearing strange noises coming from my room at night, like someone whispering or a soft cackling sound. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night I woke up to find the doll standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me with its lifeless eyes. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It was like something was holding me down, preventing me from escaping. The doll's smile turned to a sinister grin, and I felt a cold, bony hand touch my face. I screamed, but no sound came out of my mouth. From that moment on, the doll started tormenting me every night. It would whisper terrifying things in my ear, threaten me with its sharp porcelain fingers, and move around my room as if it had a life of its own. I begged my parents to get rid of it, but they refused, thinking it was just my overactive imagination. One night, I woke up to find the doll sitting on top of me, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It whispered in my ear, "I'm not just a doll. I'm a vessel for something far more sinister." That's when I knew for sure that the doll was possessed and I was in grave danger. The next morning, I secretly took the doll to a priest who performed an exorcism on it. It was a long and terrifying process, but finally, the demon possessing the doll was exorcised. I never saw the doll again after that, but the memory of it still haunts me to this day. In conclusion, the possession of the doll was a traumatic experience that I'll never forget. It taught me to be careful with the things we bring into our homes and the power of the supernatural. I hope that no one ever has to go through what I went through with that possessed doll again. Ghost stories from a prison guard. As a prison guard in a maximum security penitentiary facility, I've seen a lot of things that most people would find terrifying. But I'll always remember that there was this one particular inmate who gave me the creeps more than anyone else I've ever encountered. His name was Jack McDownston, and he was a convicted serial killer. Jack was cold-blooded, a murderer who had terrorized the city, going uncaught and evading the city police for years. He had killed over a dozen people, mostly women, in brutal and gruesome ways. He showed no remorse for his actions and refused to reveal the locations of his victims' bodies, so none of their poor families ever really had any closure. I'll always remember the first time I saw him. He was sitting on the bed in his cell, staring at the wall with a cold, empty look in his eyes, like he was deep in thought. He barely spoke beyond answering yes or no to questions and never showed any emotion of any kind, whether it be happy or sad. I know this is gonna sound stupid, but it was as if he had no soul. But things got even more disturbing when the nightmares started. At first, Jack would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and thrashing around his cell, but then he started to say that he would see things that nobody else could see. He claimed that the ghosts of his victims were haunting him, tormenting him with their cries and pleas for help all day and night while he was in his cell. At first, we thought he was just trying to play mind games with us, but as the weeks went on, we started to notice that he was becoming more and more agitated. He would lash out at the other inmates and the guards, and he started to refuse his meals. It got so bad that he begged to be locked in solitary just to get out of his cell, and when that wasn't granted, he stabbed his cellmate in the eye with a pencil while he was sitting on the toilet just to get himself moved. It didn't work though. He said the ghost had found him in there, and it was even worse because there was no light and no one else to take his frustrations out on. The prison psychologist tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't open up. He just sat there staring off into space, as if he were lost in his own world. The nightmares continued, and they seemed to get worse, until one day something happened that none of us could explain. Jack was found dead in his cell, and there was no sign of foul play. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but there were rumours that he had been driven to suicide somehow by the ghosts of his victims. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I do know that there was something about Jack that was deeply unsettling. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, or maybe it was the fact that he seemed to have no conscience or empathy. Whatever it was, I'm glad that he's gone, and I hope that the ghosts of his victims can finally find some peace. My husband's ghost. I remember the day that I killed my husband like it was yesterday. It was a hot summer night and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine. I'd been planning it for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity for me to strike. My husband was a controlling, abusive man who made every single day of my life a living hell. I was desperate to escape him and start over in a new life with my boss, who I'd been having an affair with on and off for about a year now by this point. He was pushing for me to leave my husband for a while, but I just hadn't really been ready till now. The night of the murder, my husband had come home late from work, drunk and belligerent as usual. I could feel his hot breath and drops of spittle on my face as he ranted and raved about how busy he was at work and how hard his day had been. I knew it was now or never, so with a quick movement I grabbed the knife from the kitchen counter and plunged it into his throat. I watched in horror as the life drained from his eyes and he collapsed onto the floor, a pool of blood forming around him as it gushed out of the gash in his throat. I called my boss and told him the good news. He came over and helped me deal with the body, and I moved in with my boss and we started a new life together. I thought I had gotten away with it, but soon things started to get strange. I would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, footsteps and whispers. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then I started to see him, my husband's ghost. It was haunting me, and he was out for revenge. He would appear in the dark corners of the room, his face twisted in anger and pain, and I would try to run, but he would always catch me. He would whisper in my ear, reminding me of what I'd done. I tried to ignore him, but his presence was always there, lurking in the shadows. It wasn't long before my boss started to notice that something was wrong. I confided in him about what was happening, but he didn't believe me. He thought I was losing my mind. But the ghost of my husband was getting stronger, and soon my boss could see him too. We tried to leave the house, but he followed us wherever we went. My husband's ghost was relentless. In the end, it was too much for me to bear. I couldn't take the guilt and the fear anymore. I confessed to the murder, and I was sentenced to life in prison. My boss left me, and I was left alone with the ghost of my husband, haunting me for the rest of my days. I learned a valuable lesson, that there are some sins that you can never escape from, no matter how hard you try. One night with a psycho. I'll never forget the time when my partner and I decided to take a cheeky weekend trip away to the countryside. We were looking for a quiet and affordable place to stay and stumbled upon a cozy looking Airbnb with great reviews. Little did we know, it would be a decision that we lived to regret and one that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. When we arrived, we were greeted by the host, a shriveled and dishevelled middle-aged man with what we both thought was a sinister smile. He seemed friendly at first, chatting away, telling us about how he came to own the place, his late wife, and his life journey so far, while showing us around the quaint little cabin that we had rented. However, as the day progressed, we started to notice some strange behaviour from our host. He would lurk around outside the cabin, smoking, but we could tell he was just watching us through the windows. He would also leave notes for us, bizarre ones with weird instructions like don't leave the cabin after dark and never go into the woods behind the property. We couldn't figure out why he didn't just say these things to us directly instead of this weird, indirect and frankly creepy way. Despite our growing unease though, we tried to convince ourselves that it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. But as the night fell, the terror became all too real. After a good night of talking, drinking, lovemaking, we eventually went to sleep but were jolted awake by the sound of a loud thud, and as we stumbled out of the bed we saw the front door of the cabin swinging open. Our first thought was the wind, but then we looked out the door and noticed that the night was calm and breezeless. It was then that we realised we weren't alone in the cabin. Our host had broken in and was wielding a huge kitchen knife, his eyes wild and his grin wider than ever, spit swinging from his chin. He lunged towards us, swinging madly, shouting about how it was our fault his wife was dead and that the sounds of our lovemaking was desecrating his memory of her. We were forced to defend ourselves with whatever we could find, including stools and a lamp. In the chaos, my partner was injured and was bleeding heavily. In a final fit of rage, I grabbed a log sitting by the fireplace and hurled it at the owner's head, knocking him out and sending him crashing to the floor of the cabin. We managed to escape, and as we fled into the woods, we stumbled upon a gruesome sight. Our host had been keeping a collection of human skulls and bones displayed like trophies on a makeshift altar. We eventually made it to safety, but the trauma of that experience will never leave us. We later found out that the host had a history of mental illness and had been responsible for a string of murders in the area, including his own wife. Looking back, it's terrifying to think that we unknowingly put ourselves in the hands of a psychopath. It's a reminder that not everything is as it seems and that danger can lurk in the most unexpected of places. The price of beauty. I was always drawn to the mystical and the magical, ever since I was a little girl, but unfortunately my curiosity led me down a path that I never could have imagined. It was the summer of 1985 when I first met her. I was out in the woods exploring and enjoying the beautiful day when I stumbled upon a small clearing. She was there, standing in the center of it, surrounded by candles and strange symbols drawn in the dirt. Looking back now, that alone should have been a glaring red flag to me, but she was beautiful, with long, dark hair and piercing green eyes. I was entranced by her, and before I knew it, she'd cast a spell on me. I was powerless to resist her seduction and found myself desiring nothing more than to be with her. Over the next few weeks we met several times, and each time we met I felt as though I was falling under her spell more and more. She would tell me stories of her magical abilities, of how she could make people do anything she wanted, and of the power of her spells. She fascinated and intrigued me like no one ever before, or ever since. And then one day she offered me a deal. She promised me eternal youth and beauty in exchange for my own soul. I was young and desperate to be beautiful forever and had no idea what the value of a soul was or even if one really existed, so I agreed. But the price was high. The spells she cast on me were incredibly painful, and every time I was around her, I felt as though I was being drained of my life force. I also started to notice that the women around me were getting older while I remained young and beautiful, like I was draining their life forces. I knew then for sure that she was a witch, using her powers to seduce and drain the life force from young women, and now she was using me to steal their youth and beauty to maintain her own. But I was trapped. I had given her my soul, and there was no way out. I was doomed to be her victim forever, and as much as I hated her, I couldn't stop myself from going to see her each and every evening so she could drain the life force I had been stealing from those around me. Years passed, and I watched as my friends and loved ones aged and died while I remained the same. The witch had taken everything from me, and I was nothing more than a shell of my former self with only her as my company. And then one day, she was gone, disappeared without a trace. I was left alone, with no way to reverse the spell and no way to reclaim my soul. I'm still here, trapped in this eternal cycle of youth and beauty, seeking for a way to undo this curse. So let this be a caution to you, a warning to those who would like to dabble in the dark arts. Beware the witch who seduces with spells, for her beauty is only skin deep, and her power comes at a terrible price.